4.3, introduce ordinance relating to prohibited animals and exceptions 11-0216 and 11-0217. Also attached are citizen comments that have come in regarding this item.
Thank you. Looks like I got a few speaker cards. Why don't you guys okay with hearing the speakers first, then we'll go from there. So I'll list out the speaker cards. If anyone isn't on this and wants to speak after that, certainly step up to the mic, but you've got 3 minutes. We try to keep it to that if possible. I'm just going to go in the order I got them here. So if Suzanne Nelson is ready, if she could step up to the... Lucky you, you get to go first, huh?
Because I called you today, right?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your time. I understand you're very busy, and I'm not sure when we were celebrating 4th of July, we would be talking about chickens on Tuesday. So with that said, my name is Suzanne Nelson. I was born and raised on a farm in the Texas Panhandle. I lived in Grand Forks on 8th Street since 2009 with my husband and 2 daughters. I learned some facts doing a crash course in chickens. I know chickens because I've lived on a farm, but urban chickens specifically. For example, did you know that chickens cluck at 65 decibels? That's about on par with a conversation. Dogs, for example, bark at 100 decibels. I also learned there's a website that's completely dedicated to city planning. It's called planning.org, and they have a whole section just on urban livestock. In that section are the documents that I emailed earlier today. Thank you for helping me with that. One is a document from the Environmental Law Institute in Washington, D.C. The other is from a university in New York. Overall, there are 2 points that I want to address. First is regarding chickens specifically, and the second is the process to determine solutions. So for the chickens, the documents will detail some of the concerns that have been raised regarding chickens. Chickens are not shown to spread diseases any more so than any other what we would consider a normal pet, such as a bearded dragon, a dog, a cat. They're also not shown to depreciate property value, which I think is another concern raised by constituents in Grand Forks. In fact, despite the fact that Google searches have increased dramatically for urban chickens, since the beginning of the pandemic, I was unable to locate a single documented instance where chickens have depreciated the value. There's a lot more detail in the documents, so I'll leave it at that for you to review at your leisure. I know that there's a lot of information in there, but all of the information is also cited in the documents themselves. Secondly, from an overall standpoint, I don't have an opinion on the chickens. I don't know what the best solution is. I will say, though, that I was a bit alarmed at how this came to pass. The appearance is that this was decided on by the council members and a handful of Grand Forks constituents. I don't think this is something that the greater Grand Forks community agrees with in general. I had the opportunity to speak to President Sandy as well as Councilman Weber earlier today. I really appreciate the time on a very busy day to speak to me about this. I would urge the council, if they're not already doing so, to consider some sort of prioritization matrix or a root cause solution-based mechanism when trying to determine solutions for problems that constituents raise. I think that this is a really hard job. You guys have to constantly balance the needs and wants of the few with the many, and that's not always easy to do. For this specific case, I don't believe this is egregious enough for an all-out ban. I don't see anything that indicates that this is what the greater Grand Forks population wants. I don't see any sort of public health or safety concern that was immediately raised regarding the specifics and only chickens that we have in Grand Forks that are licensed. And I would strongly urge you as the authority to consider alternatives as opposed to an all-out ban. I know that this seems like a small problem and it might add bigger problems, but I think that the overall issue is warranted further consideration. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ms. Nelson. We got Sarah Willardson.
Hi. Again, I want to thank you also for your time in hearing this. I think you're going to see there's probably a lot of people that were interested in chickens that didn't know they could get them, as I think the permits are showing. I was the only chicken permit holder as of last week, I understand. So, and I reside in Mr. Sandy's ward, so I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm taking it personal, but I definitely feel that this is about my chickens. I was unaware of any complaints prior to your meeting. So I reached out to Mr. Sandy and tried to find out what is the reason my chickens, why don't you want chickens in town? And honestly, I don't feel I've gotten any reason other than some people just don't feel they belong in town. They should be on a farm. Which is an opinion, and I guess everyone has a right to opinion. We have things that our neighbors do all the time that we don't agree with. I don't feel it's the right for us to tell our neighbors what they can and can't do, though, unless there is a true reason that it's disturbing us. So I think we ended on agree to disagree is how it came about. I also talked to public health, and my understanding was there was no formal complaints against me, although there had been some checking into as far as if they could enforce an HOA in my area, which that dissolved back in 2010. So there is no HOA in my area that would not permit that. So I think she created some really great points of what they are for. There's an article in the Herald about my son. We got these as a pandemic project. He was home from school. He's always wanted chickens. He's like, Mom, I'm home. And I'm like, you can't have chickens in town. But he did the work. He looked it up on public health. Mom, I got to get this permit. We called public health. He went to the neighbors and asked them, can I have them? Are you okay with this? They gave it the okay. We got the chickens. We've raised them from little chicks in our garage starting, in a brooder. It was a family project. We built the coop for them that's insulated. Obviously, our winters where we didn't know how we were going to do this. And it's been a great family project. They've been a really fun animal, which is not what I expected. They're like, they're contained. I'm in a privacy fence. I guess the change is going to having urban chickens. That is just what we're seeing more and more. And I feel that not allowing them, actually prohibiting them, isn't really fair. I think there is a way we can work together to come to a common ground as far as there needs to be rules in place. Obviously, they need to be contained, but as far as prohibiting them, I think that was going a little too far. So, that's all I have. Any questions for me? Owning chickens?
Thank you. Any questions? Since she offered, any questions for Ms. Willardson?
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. How do you get an applause like that? I want to get one of those sometime. James Carney.
Thank you for the time, Council. I'm here in opposition of rewriting the city ordinance regarding fowl in the city. I guess we were one of 10 permit holders in the last 10 years. I did not know we didn't have a permit. We got a letter for renewal. I just haven't sent it in yet because it still gave me a window to turn that in. But we do have chickens on our property. We do live within city limits. I've had no problems with my neighbors to my knowledge. I keep a good relationship with them. I ask them on a regular basis if there's any problems with our chickens, if there's anything at all, and we address them immediately. When we did the permit process, we were surprised how easy it was, simply because, one, we didn't realize there was a permit. Two, it was a simple email. I think previous permits were simply, we emailed saying we have chickens, they emailed back saying, get consent from your neighbors. We have 2 neighbors, no neighbors behind us. We back up against Demers. Got their permission with no problems. We even actually asked them before we even knew there was a permit. So we tried to do the neighborly thing, asking. I would hope they would say something if there was a problem. But our chickens we've had them a little over a year now. We have currently 8 chickens. We originally started with 6. We got a couple more. And they live in an enclosure in the backyard. That enclosure is cleaned regularly. We've done our homework on how to keep them clean because we don't want to spread disease. We don't want to have odor. We don't want to be a problem. And we've done our best to prevent that. And we sit in our backyard all the time. No odors, nothing. Our dogs are louder. The air conditioning unit is louder. We made sure not to get roosters. Roosters are loud. They wake people up. It's an alarm clock. So we didn't do that. The ordinance does not provide any guidance on roosters, so we took it upon ourselves. Let's not have that annoyance out there. We don't want it, so why would our neighbors want it? An outright ban does seem a bit much. I think it's a big step. Completely removing that from the ordinance, the exemption that chickens do have, did seem like a big step. I don't think there's a single person up here that wants chickens, that wants them banned outright or free rein. I don't think anyone in town is trying to build a commercial operation with chickens. It's also in the ordinance that you can't do that, but I don't think that's anyone's intent with backyard chickens. Our intent was to have something our daughter can take care of and grow and learn responsibility, and it was something that we enjoyed doing. The chickens are surprisingly a good time. They're easy to take care of. We have 2 dogs. Dogs don't care in the slightest about the chickens. We actually have wild dogs that came from a deployment. And that was our biggest concern. The dogs are going to get riled up. They haven't. The only thing that has been an issue with our chickens was an owl. Never saw that coming. Our coop is currently surrounded with cattle fence up and over, so nothing's really getting in there. I didn't really plan on threats from the air, but an owl did get in. Fixed that problem. I haven't seen the owl since. We've had no problem. So I think along with everyone else, we're happy to work on compromise, figure our way forward, but I am opposed to rewriting of the city ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. C.T. Marvula.
Thank you, Mayor and members of the council. The irony is that I'm amazed no one has remarked on it. Today is Happy Fried Chicken Day in the United States, so the subject is appropriate. As you can tell, I'm an honorary colonel, awarded this honor by General Broussard of the Gilby Militia. That doesn't have a lot of sway once you're outside Gilby. But mayors, members of the council, and fellow patriots, I had a Dickens-like experience last night. I time traveled through 3 different periods of history. And as you ponder the seriousness of this life or death decision before you, Thomas Paine asked me to pass on some advice. "These are times that try men's souls," said Paine. He's confident you'll find the inner strength to deal with the seriousness of this issue. Next, I found myself with Robert Kennedy. He also offered some advice. He stated, "Some people ask, why did the chicken cross the road?" He replied, "I dream of a better world where the chicken can cross the road where their motive is not questioned." That is the dream of Robert Kennedy. Why should we question the motive of the chicken crossing the road? And my third stop in my Dickens-like experience was in a Birmingham jail with a young Martin Luther King. Together we worked on the first draft of his famous letter. "Does it matter what came first, the chicken or the egg?" asked King. And then he added his famous quote, "I pray for the day when all chickens, whether born from a brown shell or a white shell, will be judged by the tenderness on the grill, not the color of their shell." I do believe he edited some for the final draft. And then as I awoke, I thought of 2 generally accepted great movies that ever were made: Citizen Kane, a classic by Orson Welles, and Chicken Run by Peter Lord. Who could ever forget that memorable quote by Mr. Tweedy? "Mrs. Tweedy, the chickens are revolting." Members, I'm someone who knows a thing or two about chickens. I urge you not to cluck up this young man's entrepreneurial spirit. This is a slippery slope. Next animal control will be coming from Mr. Chandler's birdie. Who knows, PETA may well kidnap our own UND hawk and hold it for ransom in Fargo. These chickens have names: Lena, Stelly, Betty, Honey, Golden, and Clucker. Do not call a foul on them, F-O-U-L, on this young gentleman's legal foul, F-O-W-L. Set the FORKS fabulous 5 fowls free. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marvula. Is there no one else? Is there anyone else that wants to speak on this matter? All right, I think we can wrap that up, and I'll open it up to council for comment. Mr. Sandy, please.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I have a lot of time to talk turkey with my wife, and several other people spend a lot of time defending my position on this issue. Ms. Willardson and I had a very nice visit. Actually, Ms. Nelson and I had a very nice visit today as well. My concern never was about any of the current chickens that are in our community. My concern is whether our community in general feels that chickens should be part of our residential life or not. My feeling was and still is chickens are a farm animal, and in my opinion belong on a farm and don't belong inside city limits. However, I've heard from lots of people that think chickens are great. I don't know if there are enough votes because I haven't been asking council members their opinions. The two conversations I had with council members, I think they would even attest to the fact that I haven't been making calls trying to get people to support a ban on chickens, because that wasn't what this was about. For me, this was about having the conversation and an open conversation about why we have chickens currently in our city, and if it is a reasonable approach. So my discussions with the other two council members were related to if there aren't the votes, then perhaps we should look to tighten up the current ordinance. It wasn't about me lobbying for people to change their opinions or even trying to impose my opinion on anyone else. I think, and I've always stated that all the council members are elected for their opinion, and we should be able to provide our opinions openly at will, regardless of whether people agree or disagree, because that's why we are elected. And so my constituents weren't happy about what was going on in their neighborhood, which educated me on the fact that there are chickens in Grand Forks. And as I mentioned before, I didn't know, which is why I can fully and confidently say this has nothing to do with this young man's chickens. I didn't even know he had chickens. I didn't know there were chickens in our community until I found out from a neighbor. And so therefore I started asking the questions quite some time ago about whether other council members agreed that chickens should be part of our community. And if it dies for lack of a second, I'm not going to have any hard feelings. I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance as drafted by the city attorney.
Thank you, President Sand. Do we have a second?
Thank you, Mayor. So I would make the suggestion, if I may, Mr. Mayor, that we would, knowing that there isn't an appetite to ban chickens from the city, I would suggest that we should take a look at the ordinance as it sits and perhaps change some of the language to add a limit to the number of chickens that would be allowed. And in addition to that, and I'm not sure what that number should be. I've heard from some people that have chickens that it should be as few as 2. I've heard from Mr. Bedard that perhaps 6 or 8 is reasonable. I don't know what that number is, and that certainly should be up for debate. But I do believe we should set a limit rather than having that open-ended. And then I would suggest that in addition to all adjacent properties being notified, I think we should change it from 75 feet back to the 200 feet that it was in 2008. And I don't think it should be measured from the chicken coop. I think it should be measured from the property line where the chickens may be wandering. But that's just my opinion on it. So I'm not going to make that motion. I'll leave that up for other people to debate. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I guess my thoughts would be, in order to not, go back and have to do this again and have another conversation, is there a council member that would want to move to adding it to 200 feet and setting a limit, 6 to 8, somewhere in there for chickens, or do you want to wait and have this further looked at, another introduction of an ordinance?
I'm happy to, if somebody has a friendly amendment that they want to make on the current language, I'm happy to move it forward tonight, certainly.
Vice President Mock.
I wonder if it would be something that we should say all adjacent property owners should be notified, as opposed to either 200 feet and all adjacent property owners, or if we could just leave it as adjacent property owners so that they could be informed.
Mr. Kavami.
A couple little comments. I agree. I think that 200 feet from, I like the idea of wherever the chickens can have access to, but I think 200 feet from that could be 2 houses over, potentially, and are they going to be affected? I don't know, right? So I think adjacent property to anywhere that the chickens could be open to makes sense. I also like the idea that we make this permitting process a little bit more accessible. I don't know what that means exactly, but I had feedback from somebody in my ward that said they had every intention of going through the process but couldn't find the form. Whether that's really truly something that needs to be, something that we invest time into, I'd just like to look at that. Another thing that if we're going to set limits, which I think we should, and I don't think that I have any expertise to do that, I think we'd have to defer a little bit. I do think that there should be some sort of fine. I mean, if you have chickens and you're over the limit or you don't have your permit, is it a $25 ticket that is something that just acknowledges that the rules were broken, and then we can have some sort of paper trail, even if it's $1 per chicken in excess of the permit. Just something to track so that we're able to have some accountability. What I don't like is that if someone's breaking the rules, it's just a phone call and then we hope that they abide by it. So I would like to see things tightened up, and I agree that we'd have to increase the limit by something.
All right, do we have a motion from any council members or further comment?
I'll just add one quick thing, Mr. Mayor. I would agree. I do think that, I think I've heard it a couple times, reasonable. What is reasonable? And do I think 4 chickens, 5 chickens would be reasonable? 6 chickens? Sure. What I don't want to see is what may be reasonable to me may not be reasonable to Mr. Gosted or Mr. Sandy or whomever may have chickens in their backyard. So I do think we have to settle on a number. And I'd agree with Mr. Kavami that we also have to, if we have a permit process and that process isn't being followed, then there has to be consequences for that. We do that with every ordinance or city law that we have currently. So I do think we need to refine that and have something in there with it, and who's in charge of enforcing it, and have that outlined within the ordinance so that we're not back here 6 months from now talking about somebody having 20 chickens and we're not quite sure what we're going to do with that. So I think that would be reasonable.
Yep.
Mr. Bedard, do you know, I guess, since you probably have the most historical knowledge, how many chickens people traditionally have had? I know you've had a small number of permits, but...
Mayor Baczynski, Councilman Mock. We've had chickens in town under permit, I think up to 8. We've also had quail in town. I don't remember the number on that permit, but they were in excess of what we would typically allow for chickens because they're smaller birds and kept confined in smaller cages. So there's differences among fowl. As far as penalties, I believe there is a fining penalty available, should we receive a complaint and they not comply. I believe there are some penalties already in code.
Any further questions for Mr. Bedard while he's up there? Yeah.
Sorry, not for Mr. Bedard, but I would just add one thing. I just took a quick look on limit on number of animals in the city of Grand Forks, and effective August 18th, 2015, there's a limit for cats and dogs in Grand Forks. And households are limited to have a total of not more than 6 cats and dogs, but no more than 3 of those can be dogs. So we're limiting cats and dogs in our city at 6. I would assume that limiting chickens at 6 would be fair as well.
Thank you, Mr. Weigel. Mr. Augusta, do you have something to add, sir?
I do. I don't mean to discourage the momentum that's going on, but there's a lot of momentum coming at me at once, and to draft the agreement, I'd like to have this come back, not necessarily through a cow, but at another city council meeting. I think the cow is July 12th to the 19th as a first reading of an ordinance. That gives me an opportunity to work with Mr. Bedard to come up with the number, and suggesting 6, it seems reasonable, or it seems like a good starting point anyways. Because I had the same information about the number of chickens of 6 and quail double that or potentially 20, and I'd like to have the opportunity to sit down and draft this so that when we get together at a city council meeting as a first reading, we're moving in the right direction rather than a number of conditions before I've had the opportunity to speak to the public health, Mr. Bedard as well, if that seems...
Sounds good. No, I think that'd be great. At least tonight, 4.3 and the outright banning of chickens through that has died for lack of seconds. So why don't we'll move on, and we'll just have some follow-up with you and Mr. Bedard, and you can bring something forward at that July 19th meeting.
We will do that.
Mr. Cavani.
I just want to thank everyone that reached out. When we do things, it's nice to get feedback. So I think we were heard pretty loud and clear that there was a lot of people that were not happy with that. So I appreciate everyone's efforts.
All right. Any further discussion on that? Moving on.